All right, guys, thank you for watching, and we are live again with our post-July 4th first live stream that we've had, and we're back on our Tuesday regular routine. So hopefully this will be kind of a catch-up show, really, for almost more than anything else. And I'm giving you a little bit of a preview of one of the main videos that I did today that'll probably launch tomorrow, and discussing that a little bit, which is basically what exactly is Bob Ferguson hiding, and why isn't he updating that open checkbook website that supposedly the Office of Financial Management is supposed to be running. So that's a bit of a conversation starter for tonight's live stream. But again, at the end of the day, this is an Ask Me Anything live stream, which means you essentially control the topic and whatever issues we're going to be talking about here. Just a quick reminder, if you are going to ask a question, please try to use the @WeTheGoverned. And it just makes it a little bit easier for me to spot the questions, depending on whether you're entering them in down below the video or on the side of the video, depending on what kind of device you're interacting with tonight's live stream on. This is just a way for me to be able to distinguish the question from a potential variety of different comments that go back and forth. I try to get to questions. Sometimes I'll pull out comments, but mostly I'm trying to get to questions. And I can't answer your question if I can't find it. That just makes it a little bit easier. So don't forget to do that if you can down below. And again, I have the two screen system set up. Kind of move the other camera back to the same side that it was before. I just think it's a little bit easier to understand the studio setting that we have here. Also, just a quick update on Washington Doge training. We have 2 more classes scheduled for next week. It's Monday in Lewis County and Thursday up in Clallam County. So both of the details on those are on our website at wethegoverned.com, and you can go and find the class schedule there. I don't actually have any official class training, Doge Washington training schedules planned out other than those 2 dates for next week. So the calendar's sort of open after that. If you are some of the people talking to me about doing the one up in Bellingham or the one in Seattle or a couple of these other ones in Vancouver and a couple of the other ones around the state, it's probably a good time to start nailing down those dates so that we can get those dates kind of set up on the calendar moving forward. A lot of feedback from some of the Washington Doge class training work and some of the people that are out there actually paying attention, digging into local government. We got some interesting stories, I believe, that'll be coming out in the near future. But the one that I did the next video on is just going to be about the fact that the Washington checkbook at the Office of Financial Management has suddenly mysteriously stopped issuing information after March, since many of you got involved in paying attention to what was going on there and starting to expose some of the more ridiculous and absurd expenditures that were going on there, which was pretty funny. So that's obviously Bob Ferguson and his cronies deciding that they don't like the bad narrative and stories that come out of the fact that once you find out how they're squandering and wasting your money, you're usually not as happy with local government after that. So I do find that to be kind of a funny end result of some of the work that the Washington Doge people have already been involved in. I also kind of anticipate today, as we get into this, to have a deeper dive discussion about some of the election integrity reform issues that are coming down from D.C., what the Homeland Security lists are inevitably going to be revealing here about Washington State, and our ability to get access to those lists and be able to expose the truth about exactly how many non-U.S. citizens are registered to vote, at least as a starting place moving forward, and how many of them voted, of course. So we can get into some of that information as well. The only other 2 other events that might be interesting for some people to be aware of, I know I'm going to be at. If you happen to be out in South Dakota, I'm going to be out there speaking to some activists this weekend. Probably not too many people watching this video will be out there at that event, but also in September, and I believe it's at the Yakima Convention Center, I am going to be doing some training and presentations at the Republican activism event that they're doing out there. I forget the name that they're basically calling it, but I know I was just speaking to some people here about a few of the formats and some of the events and activities that are going on around that. So anyway, a lot's happening, lots going on. So just looking forward to being able to catch up on one of our first live stream Ask Me Anythings that we've had since July 4th. And I hope you had a safe holiday, didn't blow any of your limbs and extremities off. And hopefully if you were able to get through the holiday without doing that, some close calls maybe, but I don't know if you've noticed how many. There's been a lot of fireworks. There were a lot of fires that were started around July 4th, which there always has been. But it was interesting to see the way the media portrayed many of those. I've always believed that they don't want us having fireworks most of the time because they've just generally been opposed to fireworks. When I was a kid, I loved fireworks. July 4th is one of my favorite holidays. And so it's just fun to see how many of them, where I live, I can see them going off all over the valley below us and the neighborhood around us. Live pretty rural, so neighborhood might be a bit of a stretch, but at least the various properties where people are willing to launch them off, and most people do pay attention to whether or not there's any fire concerns that are going on around that time. Let's go to some of the questions that people actually have. And Nathan, you're first up on the list, and the question that you have is, do you think that awarding the Washington State Ferry contract to a company in Florida was a good idea? And if we could have created hundreds of jobs in our own state by making them here? And my pro-Washington State bias on this, of course, is that I would have much rather preferred to be making the ferries in Washington and not in Florida. I am, to be honest, a little surprised that Ferguson decided to go to Florida to make the ferries instead of keeping the jobs in Washington. It was about $1 billion contract. And I'm not sure if you've ridden on the ferries in Washington State lately. I've taken a number of them. I had to go up to San Juan's not that long ago. And I've been riding the ferries since I was a kid. And I want current and updated ferry systems just like anybody else. And the fact that they couldn't find, in Washington State, Puget Sound in particular, where shipbuilding has been in our history for well over 120 years here, and to have it not be an option even, to really, not even a close option, to be able to build any of the ferries in Washington State, in Puget Sound, and instead of having to go to Florida to do it, it speaks more to some of the incompetence, historically, the cumulative incompetence of government making it harder to do things here, and also just the fact that they've increased the costs of manufacturing in Washington, which I think is also going to drive away not just this decision, but many other decisions on where you're going to manufacture things. And Washington State is, in theory, a really good place to locate a manufacturing facility if it wasn't for the governance that we have here, which is incompetent and abusive at best. So were you to remove that, between the weather, the geography, natural resources, all the other benefits that we do have here, you're able to overcome those benefits and make things worse with bad governance. And the Democrats in Washington are demonstrating how to do that, apparently, on a fairly regular basis. And the ferry system, the contract, was definitely one of those. Let's see. C. Price. In Vancouver, the school district tells the assessor how much money it wants for the next year's budget, and then residential taxes are adjusted to meet that. Where's the pushback on the school budget? Okay, so let me get into, there's a little bit of a misleading, and I totally understand why you'd feel this way, but essentially, the school's budget is as far as what they can take, as far as how the budget impacts local property taxes, it essentially comes in two buckets usually. One of them is what they call the maintenance and operation levy, and that is something that usually have to vote on every 2 to 4 years. I believe most of the Vancouver school districts probably have it on a 4-year cycle, and essentially that's the levy that does come out of your property taxes. It takes 50% plus 1 to approve it, and if you reject that, then there is no levy. There's no money being collected. Obviously, a school district, if you've watched this and tracked it before, they'll try to run it a couple times, but if you reject it a couple times, there is no budget, there's no property tax being taken out because of that. But you're right in the sense that it's a fixed amount of money, and what the assessor does is they take that allocation of $100 million, whatever that maintenance and operation budget is, and they spread it over all the properties. Now, theoretically, if you're in a growing community, which actually Vancouver is right now, and you're building new warehouses and homes and things like that, because the budget stays fixed, what happens is it spreads out across a larger. this coefficient of dispersion when it comes to splitting up that budget and applying it to everybody's property. In theory, the millage rate, which is the dollar number per thousand of assessed value, starts to drop over time because that amount of money right there is a fixed amount of money as opposed to like a percentage of the value of your property or something like that. And so it feels, the assessor will tell you, well, we don't set the school budgets. That's true, the assessor doesn't. The school does officially have to go through a process where voters approve the levy budget. Now, it's even more significant when it comes to bonds because the levy has to be renewed every 2 to 4 years. Mostly it's 4 years, but your school district could do it every 2 years if they're masochistic about it. The bonds are different. Bonds apply generally to building new school buildings or rebuilding old school buildings. They have to be attached to capital assets, and they're typically on a 20 to 25 year bond basis. And so they're essentially, and that takes a 60% or more approval in again, a special election, usually in February, and you either shoot it down or support it. Many of the bonds lately have been shot down. And so the reason why they have a higher threshold on the theory and why they have the higher threshold on the bonds is because you're assigning a debt, again, assessed the same way. It's a fixed amount of money, depending on how the money is actually borrowed, and then it's applied the same way that the regular M&O levy would be applied. And so it's a fixed amount, and in theory, that fixed amount's decreasing all the time until the bond's paid off at the end of usually it's a 20-year bond or a 25-year bond, depending on the cycle. And so the assessor isn't determining your tax rate. What they are determining is your value of your property. And the way the assessor plays the game is if they decide to overinflate value of the property, they technically build up more space that they could tax you more in the future because there are millage rate limits. Millage rate being the amount of dollars per value of your property that they can assess in a tax. And the problem is, of course, with inflation and all these other things that are going on, it kind of conceals the fact that you have this escalating property tax increase. And roughly, depending on where you live, you're paying about 58% of your property tax is going to education. It isn't going necessarily to local levies or levying a bond if you have both of them in your school district, but roughly 25% of your property tax right off the bat that goes to the state, that's coming back in the school system somewhere. It may not necessarily be coming back to your local school district, but essentially supports public education. And so those pockets of money, that's the majority of your property taxes in almost every area. If you look at your county property taxes, usually that's about 11% of your property tax bill. So that brings you up to about 69% of your bill, and the rest of it gets split up between fire districts, park districts, cemetery district, conservation district funds. I mean, there's all these little slices, and those are usually relatively small amounts distributed the same way. Conservation district's money is usually distributed on a fixed dollar amount per property. And so that one is oftentimes one of your smallest bills that you'll get, but it's a fixed amount. It isn't adjusted for valuation. So $1 million property is going to pay the same amount to the conservation district that a $10,000 property would pay. But everything else is shifted around via the assessor's assessment of your valuation of your property. And supposedly they follow Department of Revenue guidelines on highest and best use assessments. And this is a longer conversation, and now I feel like I'm getting way too wonkish on this conversation. But the school districts, if you don't like the school district and how they're squandering your money, you can fight over that budget, but you have to do it at the school board level, and I would encourage you to start earlier rather than later. Most school levies will fail if there's a campaign against them because it's a relatively small subset of the population who's even paying attention. The average school district area has usually around 18% of the population, sometimes as high as like low 20% of the population who actually has a kid in the school district or a grandkid where they're directly involved in the kids in the district. And so the theory that the school district usually operates under is that those are the people most likely to vote in favor of a levy. That's the theory. It isn't always true, but that's the general approach that they take. And so if you think about it, going out and convincing people to vote no on a tax is usually not that difficult, but you do have to run a campaign to do that. And that takes some effort and some money. And if you've listened to any of my live streams over the years, I know I've talked constantly about the distributed cost concentrated benefits challenge that faces us when we're dealing with local governance. And if you have an incompetent school district that squanders your money and wastes it and doesn't do what they say they're going to do with it, and they can't be trusted with the tax dollars you give them, and you decide to defeat that levy, you can do that. Most people can successfully run. You could, if you ran a successful campaign, you can defeat that. And that's why narrative control and spinning the narrative by the school districts is such a high priority to them. And I think that they're putting themselves unusually at risk right now too, because with the 35% increase in homeschooling across Washington state and the 10% increase in private schooling just in the last 8 years or so. I just looked at this because of Chris Reichel's tenure as OSPI instructor, or superintendent of public instruction. But those increases have happened, and so those people have pulled their kids out of the public school system, and they're even less inclined, in many cases, to support the public school levies. And they are fully aware of it. The administration and the union is fully aware of the collapse in enrollment levels that are occurring in Washington state and the direct potential impact that causes to them and their ability to support levies and bonds, particularly levies, that have a direct impact certainly on the union dues, but also on the school district administration. So you can defeat them, but you have to work, or you can stop and reduce those taxes by working your local school district. School board to either challenge them on the budget, or you could run the campaign to defeat the levy. And there were a lot of levies, not so much levies, but the bonds in particular have been defeated lately at a fairly high level. Let's go back here. Here's a question. Kathy Roots, do you know if there is Doge Oregon training currently or planned? And right now I'm not aware of any, but I'm happy to go down there and put some on for you. So if you're from Oregon, reach out and let me know where you're at. And I'm happy to teach people down in Oregon how to do this as well. The public records laws are a little different down there. It's actually a little bit harder to utilize them, but Oregon has ample opportunity, especially in the Portland area and the surrounding area of the state, where massive amounts of tax dollars are squandered and wasted, just like Washington and California, and Boise, Idaho, and Austin, Texas, and plenty of other places in the country. They're wasted. I mean, it's always been a question: is what percentage of your tax dollars that you send to them is either wasted, stolen, or squandered, or misused in some significant way. And to some extent, it depends on how you define it. This has always been a question that we look at more and more as time goes by, but there's ample opportunity to cut your budgets in government, and believe me, government's not going to do that for you. So you have to find solutions. But if you want me to do some stuff down in Oregon, I'm happy to do that. Washington is my priority, but I'm willing to help activists in other states. I've done some over in North Dakota. I'll probably be doing some in other conservative states as well, in other surrounding states, but I'm happy to help wherever you are. But the value that I provide outside of Washington is probably a little bit less, other than just the general focus on how to be organized, what to look for. The problems are pretty much the same everywhere. It's not like there's a unique way of stealing money or wasting your money that somebody's going to do in Oregon that's never been seen in Washington, for example. Here's a question, Brian B. Can we all bombard the hate and bias hotline with phony calls or prank phone calls until they're just forced to shut it down? You can try. I'm just not sure how they're going to manage it. They may, obviously, it's one of the stupidest ideas and another wasteful idea, and every aspect of every penny spent into this dumb idea that was Bob Ferguson's brainchild originally. Then do whatever you need to call in and report yourself, everyone else, report Antifa, report your evil professors at Evergreen State College for their racist and corrupt and terrible behavior that they have. If you go to any of these colleges, you're going to have crazy off the charts nut jobs basically teaching your class. Sometimes you can report them and turn them all in. What happens is the more it gets flooded, the less value they really have with the dumb idea, of course. And the snitch lines are never very effective or efficient anyway. The one thing I will point out is that these all become part of the public record. So, use some common sense. They can probably figure out who's sending in the calls or making the phone calls or turning in things. So, don't say anything that you wouldn't be willing to admit to if you were under some kind of deposition. But again, I think there's a lot of fun that you can have in doing that. And, it's a stupid, terrible thing anyway. Next question here. Cat's Eye. 2020. Can I turn the governor in? Because honestly, I think he hates us. Yes, you can, and you probably should. And I'm sure that Bob Ferguson's probably one of the most reported people on the bias and the stupid I hate and bias hotline. Bob Ferguson definitely hates you. He hates everybody, actually, who didn't financially support him in the last political campaign, for sure. And that type of behavior is the type of thing I think it doesn't hurt for all of us to draw attention to. And I'm sure that he's been reported many times. What'll end up happening is they'll just stop talking about it. That's usually what happens. They don't like the results. They're widely mocked for implementing them in the first place. It was one of the things that Washington State got mocked at a national level for, was putting in one of these, was put in this hate and bias hotline, the snitch line, and it certainly makes and helps encourage other people not to take Washington State very seriously, because our government doesn't take itself or certainly its job seriously at all when they waste and squander resources on stupid things like that. Michael Case, nice to meet you in Silverdale a couple weeks ago. Question, knock with J. Paul's name popping up a lot by the feds over her ICE comments. Will this just push Sant to run for her seat? No, actually, Sant, this is an interesting question. And Kashama Sant, for those of you who don't know, she's the outspoken leftist socialist who was on the city council in Seattle, and also who helped promote the Summer of Love, the Chop Chaz takeover on Capitol Hill, one of the crazier nut jobs that Washington State's been able to produce in local governance, and that's a difficult level to stand out in, right? If you're just an average clown or crook, you just blend into the background and you're pretty normal in local government, especially in Seattle. But to stand out and be crazier than the rest so that people even know you, Kashama Sant really did a good job just standing out as a crazy person. Now, Pramila Jayapal is currently in Congress, but her seat is relatively safe, and Sant, at least at this point in time, is not going to run against her. What Kashama Sant did is made sure that she is located in Adam Smith's seat, or I should say she's running for Adam Smith's seat. The difference for the congressional seats is you can run for a congressional seat and not live there. It's a little bit harder if you don't live there, because you have to explain why you don't live there and why you're running for that seat, but nevertheless, it's not uncommon. So many people run for Congress that don't actually live in the district that they're running for. Once they get elected, in theory, I believe they're supposed to move to that district. And the 9th legislative district, which is where Adam Smith is located, it kind of goes from it's moved over the years, but the 9th district goes down into Pierce County, and then it goes all the way up and kind of wraps around South Seattle, more the South Seattle area. It kind of has this little part that goes up into Bellevue even. And that was done in order to get his little McMansion, included in the congressional district when he moved and they did the last census restructuring. But that's who she's running for, that seat right there. And Adam Smith is probably vulnerable, because there was another Smith v. Smith race a while ago. I had done an article about it, like The Matrix, Mr. Smith fighting Mrs. Smith in this case, or Ms. Smith. I don't know how she identified, so maybe I should say Mr. Smith in both cases, but they definitely had a political fight, and there were no Republicans in the race. The Republican got squeezed out of the top two primary, so the two Democrats fought each other. And Adam Smith is an interesting person in Congress, because he's kind of a chameleon. He can pretend to be whatever he needs to be, depending on who he's talking to, and he can do it right on the fly. I mean, I've watched him doing the campaign trail. One of the least based in reality sort of people when it comes to believing in anything except for himself. However, he happens to be very good at constituent services. He really is. I may not like his politics. I may think that he's a dishonest and corrupt politician, but his constituent services are superior. And so he does a really good job managing constituent services. And so he's been able to kind of survive quite a few challenges over the years, even as that district has changed quite a bit. And Sawant's making a wise choice coming after him, because it's not hard to portray Smith as corrupt and mainstreamy established if they can. And to her perspective, she wins if she can squeeze out Adam Smith in the primary with maybe a decent Republican running. And then it would just be a crazy Sawant versus a Republican. So that's probably their real objective right now. The Democrats are probably trying to recruit a solid Republican that can gain a bunch of votes. And then the theory is that they would pull votes away from Smith. And Smith gets squeezed out in the top 2 primary, maybe throw a couple other Democrats in there to mix it up a little bit more, and then they would prevail. Smith's fully aware of that. He does believe math is real. He may vote away your children's future with every aspect of his time in government, but he still has the capability when it comes to elections to run the math. And they're always going to be concerned because the left is much better than just the plain Jane Democrats in actually harvesting ballots and running the game better than just a mainstream Democrat. So you socialists are going to be much better at doing that. And Sawant demonstrated that when she ran for city council last time. So he's got a challenge there in how he faces off with her, and he's going to be taking it fairly seriously. But anyway, that's how it goes. It was good to see you in Silverdale. Silverdale was a great training event. That's the first Doge Washington training that we actually did in a restaurant. Wasn't sure how well that would work out. I was actually a little nervous because we'd maxed out all the tables in that one area, but it turned out to be okay. It worked out well, and I think the people who were there really appreciated it. I've got 2 really good stories coming out of that Silverdale, Kitsap County area. Couldn't do the videos in time today because I'm still missing a couple of key public records, but I do plan on getting into those stories, and I really did enjoy doing that Doge Washington training class. Okay, Rex right here. I have been quite appalled at the number of sanctuary cities supported by certain governors, especially Governor Gruesome Newsom's Los Angeles. Is Washington State supporting any such sanctuary? Well, we absolutely are. In our infinite wisdom and foolish stupidity, our state became a sanctuary state just like California a long time ago. And one thing to remember is that Washington State's political leadership, the Democrats in Washington State, view themselves as kind of like the mini-me to California. So sometimes Washington State will lead the way and experiment on dumb ideas, and then California will follow us. But California is still the 500-pound gorilla when it comes to money and scope and size of their whole political operation. And so Washington State is a smaller state in many ways. And so the political leadership here usually kind of tends to put the California leadership up on a pedestal when it comes to Democrats. And so the Republicans obviously widely mock California as it's deserved. But the Democrats here oftentimes let California take the point on a lot of this stuff. And so the sanctuary city idea was a bandwagon a number of years ago in California and Washington and Oregon for that matter. And so all these states are sanctuary states. And then within those jurisdictions, there's a lot of virtue signaling that's gone on over the years where counties become sanctuary counties and cities become sanctuary cities. It's probably a shorter list to talk about the number of counties and cities that are not sanctuary counties and cities that didn't go down the rabbit trail and follow this drama 4 or 5 years ago when it was hot and the political thing at the time. And so what's happened, obviously, is that now with the federal crackdown on the border, which somehow the Democrats told us it was impossible to close the border without some kind of stupid bill reform. And surprisingly, the border actually appears to be closed down, at least somewhat effectively on the southern side and increasingly a little bit more effectively on the northern side. But with deportations going on right now in a fairly aggressive way around the country in an escalating way, especially getting rid of the violent criminals that the Democrats seem to want to keep so desperately in our country, the sanctuary sanctuary status matters because it puts a little bit more of a constraint. Obviously, the state level, by declaring your whole state a sanctuary state, it's going to discourage or at least provide some teeth behind the effort of the Attorney General and Governor Ferguson to attack your jurisdiction or your police department if they decide to not follow that rule, your sanctuary state status idea, and instead they decide to cooperate with the feds when it comes to removing violent, illegal felons and illegal criminals and illegal aliens that are in their community. That's why Adams County is currently in a litigation. AG brought a litigation against them. The funny thing is Adams County is not the only county that's declaring itself non-sanctuary county, or at least not going down the yellow brick road of the false promises and deception of the sanctuary state virtue signaling program. Franklin County has come out. A number of other counties around the state have come out, and in fact, Lewis County, just next door to me, is considering this resolution coming up tonight, I believe. In fact, even while we're speaking, I don't know what their final vote is yet, but they're considering passing a resolution where they're going to eliminate their sanctuary county status because it's just virtue signaling. It's repetitive with the state. They don't need to have it in order to be compliant with the state's law. They just getting rid of it is not a bad idea. One of the carrot and stick kind of arguments that I believe the Trump administration in theory is using is that if you're going to declare yourself a sanctuary state and a county or city, that they're not going to provide any funds, federal funds, to your jurisdiction. I haven't seen them fully implement that yet at the state of Washington level, but they might do it on a more localized jurisdiction level. So that's a little bit more incentive for some of these local jurisdictions like Lewis County, like Adams County, and like others to get out of the sanctuary state virtue signaling program. The problem, it's not a problem, the trend line, though, is that even if they are supposedly a sanctuary city or county, law enforcement in many of the jurisdictions are going to be open and cooperative with ICE anyway. They may not go out of their way just to avoid the hassle and the fight and the political drama of fighting Ferguson and the abusive nature of Washington State, who obviously the Attorney General's office, they don't care about violent criminals in your community, but they're going to care about virtue signaling, beating up on some local sheriff that's wanting to remove violent criminals that are not U.S. citizens. So some sheriffs, understandably, just aren't going to openly say that they're not a sanctuary state, county, or city, and that they're not going to follow state law, but they're going to follow federal law because of the Supremacy Clause. But they are going to be cooperate anyway. And to be honest, that's probably a majority of elected sheriffs in Washington State that fall into that category. They may not be making comments on Fox News, but they're probably moving in that direction. The handful of jurisdictions that are actually run by conservative Republicans, there's not many in Washington, but there are some. Those are openly, they either never went down that road in the first place or they're quietly repealing it in most cases right now. We'll see how that goes. I imagine that when they really do, that when the feds are really pulling back on federal dollars, that'll provide a little bit more incentive for some of the ones on the fence, and we'll see what happens. AV, yes, Jayapal needs to be taken to court and face repercussions, and Homa needs to send ICE to Washington in full force. Well, I agree with the ICE in full force. I'm not sure there's any necessary I don't think there's any. Listen, free speech is fine. You don't have to agree with somebody's speech. So Jayapal can say whatever crazy nutty thing she said. She said crazy nutty things from long before she was ever elected to office, and she just continues to do that in Congress right now. Most of it's virtue signaling. She's also not really that smart, so it's probably some of it's just dumb statements that she's making. But I think that she just creates, sometimes you need people that will mock everything that they stand for just by their own existence. And they're such virtue signalers and so such toxic personalities that they actually do a better job destroying their brand than they do helping it. And Jayapal seems to fit that category. But as one of these other commenters also mentioned here, we don't want Sawant representatives back in D.C. Jayapal's bad enough. She's kind of like the jester and a mockery of the congressional seats and government in general. But Sawant would be like the two-team crazy town, and we probably have enough of them already back in D.C. Jason Fisher, question, afternoon, Glenn. Do you know what Prop 1 increased library funding is this a good measure to back? I would vote no against all library funding in Washington State generally right now. Most of the libraries, as I've dug into most of the local libraries, they're very poorly managed. And essentially, rather than providing value to the community for the most part, they've just become another virtue signaling appendage of the leftist kind of state. They don't provide a lot of value to the community. They generally now, I mean, they've cut back on the number of books they have. They become simply a place for druggies to shoot up and to shower and to hang out and convince any parent who's sane to not bring their kids to that facility because their kids might get exposed to fentanyl or stabbed by needles in the stacks or in the couches or wherever it is that they're hanging out. It's just become absurd. And so most of the libraries have increased their costs to cater to the homeless industrial complex failures of the drug addicts coming in and then flooding the zone in the inside of the library. It's just ridiculous. So I would generally, by default, unless somebody's got some amazing story otherwise, and unless your library is unique in Washington State, I would probably vote no against pretty much all library funding moving forward now. Jack Palder is the next one up here. Did you see Region 5 is going to eliminate several Steelhead Runs in Southwest Washington? This will mean even less opportunities in local streams and the Columbia as well. I did not see that. So, Jack, I haven't tracked that. Part of that's, I think, a result of some of the drama going on at State Fish and Wildlife and some of the chaos that we see with some of the worst people that we've ever been able to scrounge up in the state of Washington and put on that board. Again, if you'd followed me, you've known that I've been involved in helping the Sportsman Alliance Foundation in their effort to remove some of these corrupt appointees, and obviously the largest Public Records Act in the state of Washington case right now, largest legal act that I'm aware of, is actually coming out of their effort to try to conceal these records from the public successfully, but now it's not so successful anymore, and so things are being exposed that haven't been before, and they've clearly done things to justify being removed from their office. I'm less familiar with the Steelhead Runs in Southwest Washington specifically, but we don't have good people running that agency at all right now, and so restoring sanity might start with just firing everybody that's in charge there. Jason Fisher, question: with the gun ban being in effect for almost 2 years and FFLs selling fixed magazine AR-15s, is it safe to assume that they're legal, or will they pull the rug out? Well, right now, if your FFL is selling them, you're probably okay. The bigger question that I have on this, and I've not had a good answer to this question for sure, biggest question I have really is, what about the people who move into Washington State and already have these firearms, and they may not even be aware that technically some of them are kind of banned. I mean, you saw this with when the feds had that whole assault weapons ban for 10 years, right? The 86 to 96. And I remember that. It was high drama, and it really inflated the costs of some of these different weapons. And the ridiculous nature of all the workarounds everybody had at that time. And then eventually it went away, which was good. But this absurd thing that's been going on in Washington State, I'm not sure how many fights we're going to have here. The Supreme Court, and I would encourage everybody to watch Washington Gun Law, because Bill Kirk does a really good job breaking down each one of these cases, not just in our state and other states, but how they affect our state and elsewhere around the country. We haven't always had consistently good rulings at the Supreme Court level, at the federal level, despite how many people thought our Supreme Court would follow the Constitution. They've missed the ball, I think, on several different decisions lately. So we'll have to see. Again, it's still better to fight in federal court than clown court. And so Washington State Superior and Supreme Court is very clownish in Washington and completely politically compromised at almost every level. And so there's only a couple categories of law that you have any chance at all in getting a non-politicized decision out of the judges in Washington State. I would not take Second Amendment cases there simply because of that. So we'll just have to see what happens. But they've obviously presumed that this fixed magazine AR-15 is okay, and so that's what they're doing. But we'll see. Smile Hunter, do you see any progress with Pam Bondis Attorneys going after Washington Department of Licensing? Maybe a nothing burger. No, actually, I see substantial progress going because it's a big deal. And Washington State's just one of like 15 or 20 states. It's over 15, but it's less than 20. It's probably closer to like 17 states that are likely to get the hammer, in part based on the New York case, in part based on what's going on in California and in a couple of these other states. We're just kind of the small bit player. I'm a little surprised that they haven't picked us up as an easy one to go after. But one of the reasons why I suspect that could be happening is we still don't have a U.S. attorney appointed by the Trump administration in either the Seattle or the Spokane office. And so without a permanent U.S. attorney in either one of those positions, or at least a permanent recent appointee, I know there's a temporary acting attorney there, but without the actual final appointed one, or at least somebody appointed in as an interim or some kind, I think that might be what they're waiting for. I don't know, because we're an easy state to go after. The big question right now is the data has been provided, theoretically, to the Secretary of State's office, and they've gone silent on it, which is interesting to me. And the local assessors, or I should say, auditors, local auditors I haven't had a clarity from them yet on their ability to actually see what's going on with it. So I still think we're in this early place to see what happens with that. But inevitably, as I've said before in my other videos that I've done on the subject before, I stand behind all of them, because there seems to be a level of inevitability advancing, and Washington State is clearly one of these states that's going to get caught up and exposed for the historic corruption and bad problems of our agencies, and the Department of Licensing is a big part of that. Let's go down here. Let's see. I'm trying to find a question, guys. Lots of comments. Just trying to zip through this to the actual. Okay, here's the next question here. TZ Burton, just wanted to say that I was able to follow your investigation into the Olympia City Councilman's corruption of $9,000 in campaign funds missing with the PDC website. Excellent video. Thank you so much for watching that. And I think I saw your comments as well, TZ, on the actual video itself, which was one I put out late last week. And essentially what that one is, you had Olympia City Councilman Gilman, who very clearly, at the end of his last political campaign, he still had 9,000 and change sitting in his political campaign, starts his new campaign for this year's election, because city councils are in off-year elections. And that money vanished. And so the question is, where did it go? And it's completely illegal in Washington state law and the Fair Campaign Practices Act and RCW 4217A. It's completely illegal for you to be able to just vanish the money. You have to account for it. Whatever you did with it, if you went and bought meth downtown, or you bought fentanyl, or whatever you did with it, bribed somebody, in theory, you have to account for it. Now, obviously, he's not going to report the truth about whether he's buying fentanyl or bribing people, or he just stole the money. And so one way or the other, he's going to have to account for that and refile it. The reason why I did that video was less about the problem with Clark Gilman, who's a terrible city councilman in Olympia, but he's not alone in that, and that's probably, honestly, the stealing the $9,000, assuming that's what he did with it, that's probably the least significant offense that he's had against the public since he's been in public office. If you look at the insanity of the Olympia City Council, he's done a lot of other things that were and voted for a lot of other things that were worse. But it was a good little piece that, through simple access of public records that you don't have to file a records request for, you can just go look. You could see whether or not you're breaking the law on that. And there's an administrative process of triggering an investigation and initiating some level of accountability, at least for that piece of their legal violation. And I wanted to show people how simple it is. I could do that exact same complaint. I can document that complaint in less than 3 minutes from start, to go look. And then it usually takes me about 15 minutes to process the complaint itself. Sometimes it's maybe closer to 25 minutes, but essentially that's how you get those complaints out there. And I wanted to walk through in the simplest path possible, because following that same methodology that I defined in that video, you could go after many other elected officials who have committed the same violation. I've filed many complaints like that, but I was just trying to expose that stuff as best I could. Let's see, Nathan. In my humble opinion, Jay Paul is less offensive than Sawant, and that's saying something. Yes, it is. But I think two crazy socialists would be, would be putting us on the map for all the wrong reasons. And so I'd rather only have one crazy socialist for now, and not elect the second one. As bad and corrupt as Adam Smith is as a congressman, he at least sounds not crazy, and he's just basically corrupt when people interview him. She would be nut job, and getting Sawant and Jayapal kind of playing off each other to see who could be the craziest clown in D.C. is probably not the optimal choice for us. Jason, with the Oregon magazine ban technically prohibiting concealed carry with normal magazines, how would people know if it goes into effect? Only carry 10-round magazines will create criminals. Okay, so that's interesting. I didn't know that it technically prohibited concealed carry with normal magazines. I didn't know that. And you're right. How would people know that it restricts you to the 10-round magazines? I'm not sure. It's a stupid law. And again, the one thing to remember is it's very obvious. There's not every Democrat who holds elected office today supports violent criminals and wants them to go out and create more victims and abuse you in the public. However, the only party that has a political platform that supports that outcome is the Democrats at this point in time, and a surprisingly large number of them seem to think that supporting violent criminals is a big part of their platform, and supporting violent crime and supporting the abuse on victims is a good idea. And so the problem is that obviously whenever you pass stupid laws, then that's going to increase the likelihood that criminals are going to be feeling more comfortable in going out and committing crimes, and you're going to be turning law-abiding citizens who want to defend themselves into criminals. And so that's obviously the problem. Nothing on this has changed since I was a Second Amendment activist in my late teens, right? This has been the same issue over and over again. But the left is obsessed on disarming citizens and preventing them from being able to defend themselves, preventing you and I from being able to defend ourselves. It's a primary obsession and priority for the left. And so it's something that we have to recognize that always has to be fought back against. You never surrender on this issue. You keep grinding away. Just like First Amendment issues, you can compromise on some things, and then some things you just never compromise on. First Amendment issues, you don't compromise on. And Second Amendment issues, you do not compromise on those. And property rights, at the end of the day, are something that we cannot be compromising on either, for the same reason, because all three of those things are primarily under attack to destroy the ability of people to be independent and to have control over their own destiny. And government, whenever it pushes on these issues, they need to be pushed back and exposed as much as possible. Night Owl, when would you like the people's list of waste and abuse of taxpayers' money in just Thurston County? Right now, don't wait. Please send it to me, Glen, Glen, at wethegovern.com. I'll compare it to the one I have. The more the better, those of us who are getting out there exposing this stuff. I want to do some more videos about Thurston County. I was just thinking about that driving in this morning, and I've got a number of stories that need to be told about just Thurston County. I know I did the Olympia school board or city councilman story recently, but I mean, that's nothing. There's a whole bunch more issues in Thurston County that need to be exposed. And so send it over to me. And if I can understand it, please make it well documented. I get people that send me stuff all the time. So here's an ineffective email. You send it, glenn@wethegovern.com. If you send me something, say, check out, and then fill in the blank, I don't care with what jurisdiction is, I'm not even going to bother looking. If you can't provide me details and documents, there's 100 other stories that are way ahead of that one. So I'm not just bored sitting around looking at things to look at. There's plenty of problems. What I do find is I get into a story that I think is good and worth exposing for a variety of reasons. And there's deficiencies in my ability to tell the story initially because I'm either lacking evidence or public record documents that I can prove, statements that I'm making about it, or there's some part of the story that I'm just missing and I don't have the data for it. And without the data and the evidence, I'm not going to typically run those stories out there. So think about that a little bit when you provide me the information, and for clarity's sake, it'll make a difference. Let's see, let's keep going down. Kathy Bradbury, I want paper ballots and in-person voting back in Washington. Well, I do too. Right now, you have paper ballots. The problem is you don't have in-person voting. So I want in-person voting and paper ballots that are fully auditable as well. And that should be our goal everywhere. Let's see. Smile Hunter, invasive aquatic plant abatement. Is it happening in Washington, and be on the lookout? And the answer to that is it is, but I find it to be fairly limited, and you should be more specific on the invasive aquatic plant definition, because it's just, you'll see that they have the weed control districts and stuff like that, because essentially it's the same idea. So like a weed control district for tansy, ragwort, or something else that you're supposed to be able to remove from your property. And owning a piece of rural property, I know I've gone out and spent hours pulling tansy because it's poisonous to animals. The funny thing is they don't require you to remove digitalis, which is definitely poisonous. It's a foxglove, poisonous to animals. They don't technically rate Scotch broom as a invasive species, even though it really is. And at least where I live in Thurston County, there's thousands of man hours that go into pulling that all the time. So anyway, it's just, there's a lot of issues there. TZ Burton, I'm in Adam Smith's district. His website's full of lies. I email him all the time with facts refuting his lies with references, and he never gets back to me. It doesn't surprise me. I'm sure he's not going to get back to you. Remember how corrupt and dishonest I think you have to be if you're going to Congress and you're going to come from a left-leaning district and you're going to be in D.C., and particularly when your highest priority is actually to make sure that you get wealthy and that you have your bed feathered by whatever special interests and lobbyists you're going to be working with over the next few years. Unfortunately, that's become the political class that we see in D.C. Doesn't even really matter what the party affiliation you have is. At least on the Republican side, there's an ideological basis for being honest in government somewhere along the way there, which that doesn't exist at all on the Democrat side as far as I can see. The Democrats support corruption provided that it advances political power. The Republicans at least say they don't support corruption, but there's plenty of corrupt politicians who call themselves Republicans in D.C. Big challenge that we have. And the issue of pushing back and fighting against it is one of those things that we just have to find ways of exposing the truth about these people. They want you to give up and surrender. And as I get emails and text messages from people all the time who want to pre-surrender because it's not instantly easy for them to have a 2-hour afternoon Sunday special solution to all the world's problems, and it becomes a permanent fixture in the future because you've had one battle and succeeded, and then therefore all the evil goes away and you never have to fight over bad government again. Not realistic. It's not how it actually works. It's not how it's ever worked, actually. It's usually very difficult and challenging, not just to even overcome corrupt and dishonest and bad people in government, but to just retain some level of competency and goodness in government is very difficult even once you get in there. It's easier the smaller government is, which is one of the reasons why people who have maybe more of a libertarian-leaning perspective on how local government needs to be run and who care about liberty and freedom as a priority, we want smaller government because smaller government's easier to manage. It's just less moving pieces for corruption. It's less money flowing into it for corruption. So smaller government's usually better, almost by default, just because of that. The bigger, the more bloated government becomes, the more likely it is you're going to bankrupt the country, you're going to take away people's freedom and liberty, and you're going to be able to bribe and corrupt your way to political power in a more long-term basis. And it's very difficult to push back on that once it's gotten to a certain size. I did notice, and this should be interesting to those of you who do care about shrinking the size of government, there's this Recision Package that's going through, a $9.6 billion Recision Package that is basically clawing back some of the money that's already been wasted out of the previous budget. And the big legal fight it's a political fight that's going on right now is the Democrats are arguing, wait a second, we already approved wasting that money a while ago. How dare you take that money away from whatever special interest we were bribing with it? And so they're trying to fight against that Recision Package, as small as it is. And it's very small, but I think it's a test case Recision Package that the feds are trying, or at least the the Doge entity, whatever it really becomes moving forward, this is part of the results of that. And that's chump change in comparison to the federal deficit and the debt that we face in front of us. But it's also kind of a shot across the bow in cutting out something that is clearly waste and totally squandering our resources. So can they get this through? You saw Chuck Schumer and D.C. fighting against it, making it seem like it's the end of the world and Armageddon and all that kind of stuff. Now, he really can't argue on the specifics of the waste and the fraud that's exposed that just needs to be cut out of even the historic budget so we don't waste that money. So mostly what he's trying to do now is just arguing, said, hey, how can we negotiate a budget with you knowing that you're going to cut some of those pieces out of it? And this reminds me of a battle that we had a couple years ago, 2 years ago, if I remember right, in Washington State, where the Republicans and Democrats negotiated on a bill. And the Republicans put in some of their changes to that bill that they wanted. And then the bill got through and it landed on Inslee's desk. And then Inslee did a line item veto of only the Republican changes to the bill so that it passed without the Republican changes that it needed in order to get out of the committees that it was in at the time, and completely changing the nature of the bill entirely. And it was legal, but very dishonest and very corrupt. And so the argument that Republicans had after that, legitimately, in the state legislature, was that there's no point in negotiating something with the Democrats or compromising because the governor will simply come in and take away whatever we think we've negotiated as a control or restriction in that bill. The governor will just line item veto. They don't have a line item veto, but they have a section veto in the state constitution. And so it eliminated the ability to have any compromise with the Democrats at all on any piece of legislation moving forward, or at least seriously threw water on that. A lot of cold water on that. In fact, they would oftentimes, before you'd have a bill with any kind of bipartisan consensus on it coming out of the Washington State legislature, the governor essentially had a pre-sign off on the Republican compromises because of that line item veto threat that existed there. So the argument that Schumer has at the D.C. level is essentially the same thing. Hey, we can't negotiate with this because you could just pull a rescission package back in and take away all the things that you gave us in order to give you votes to pass that bill. That's his argument. And that's probably about as good an argument as you're going to get from a wonkish inside the Beltway sort of argument over budgets. You know, the problem that we have, and it's so obvious in D.C., to regular people that exist out here, and the more you know about how the sausage made, the more discouraging it is to see how governance is conducted in D.C. But the sheer volume of, pork and waste and stupid projects and dumb stuff that they spend in order to pay off whatever special constituencies that they needed to is absurd. And the more of that we can cut out of the budget, Republican or Democrat, I don't care, the better. The problem, of course, is that there are times that you at the federal level, you're going to have to make investments of some kind. And distinguishing legitimate investments away, like the strategic important investments, and distinguishing between that and all these other corrupt noise and mess is really difficult because the human capacity for self-justification in those settings, particularly when those lobbyists are ensuring that you get a large amount of campaign checks the next couple cycles, becomes difficult to filter it out and see, do we really need to spend money for that bridge to nowhere? Or do we really need to spend money on that stupid electric bus that nobody's going to use? I mean, there's things that you can say no to, that I would say no to, of course, pretty easily. But I don't find that being very easy for these guys when they're dealing with their 3 martini lunch and the fancy meal in D.C. and the next 17 campaign contributions that come there. Jack, I'd offer when each state joined the Union, they literally agreed to follow the Constitution, and there appears to be no punishment for not following the Constitution until fixed. Yes, that's right. I mean, I think there's certainly outcomes that we've seen lately in the political process, and part of it's this pendulum swinging, and especially on the left side, where the quest for power is insatiable and really the priority. Nobody on the left really cares about the Constitution, other than as an excuse to protect themselves sometimes when they run afoul of the law. But it's more of an impediment to them in order to bloat the governance structure, the bureaucracy, and the special interests inside to get the power that they want. And so the quest for power is kind of eternal there. And so one of the questions is really how do you restore that sense of accountability that and checks and balances that in theory existed in the original Constitution. It's going to take a lot of work to get there. It really does. At a federal level, huge. State level, same thing, and for the same reasons. A little bit easier to make the changes if you elect the right people, but we've got a deficit of good people in Olympia, and so we need more good people to make that shift. Let's see. Educated Gypsy, it's curious that the Washington state policies are so bad it's cheaper to ship ships across the entire country than to build in your backyard. And this is a good question. So just from a practical standpoint, I'm not sure how the ferries get moved from Florida to America. I have to imagine they go through the Panama Canal, and somehow they build in the cost, which is not cheap, of doing that. And even with that cost, it's easier to get them here that way because you can't just throw them on a boat, or I should say, you can't fly them here. They're too big and heavy. You can't throw them on a truck because they're too big and tall. So how do you get these ferries? I don't think you're shipping all the parts out here, reassembling them in Puget Sound. So you have to be bringing them, as far as I can tell, through the Panama Canal. Probably not driving the ferry. You're probably in some kind of a dry dock kind of ship that holds the ferries. But I mean, it's that even with all those logistics, it's cheaper and apparently better to bring them from there. We'll have to see. Jason Fisher, question: what's the political situation in the city of Boise with ignoring state flag laws? With ignoring state, I'm assuming red flag laws is what you meant. And is it a lost cause or is it reformable? Well, there's always reform. Nothing's a lost cause. The thing about politics is that nothing's permanent, and that's a frustrating thing to those who care about liberty and freedom and who want to fight in the political space, because you believe, okay, I'm going to move the ball down the road and I'm going to restore, get some good people, freedom-oriented people, get rid of some bad ideas, and then you go home and celebrate and assume that it all's well. It's a continuous process. It's no different. I own timber property, and working in the woods is continuous. It doesn't just end one year. It's continuous work. You're limbing and you're thinning and you're removing noxious weeds and you're burning limbs and you're trying to keep it fire resistant as much as you possibly can, and you're identifying sick trees and you're removing them and you're replanting healthy trees and you're changing. You're constantly intervening if you're doing a good job running it. If you just hands off, it just becomes a mess, and then it's a lot harder to go in and do the work. So you have to go in and do this work. There's no choice. It's no different too if you've ever had a farm or you ever had to mow fields. You still mow every year. You have to do that work every year. Now, I believe that it gets easier over time if you have successes. So success matters because you're moving the needle more in your direction. But you have to know that you're continuing to do this over a period of time. And that's one of the reasons why you need to have a foundational belief system to support what you're doing. It's fair enough to say that you're going to be pragmatic at times with compromise, and I'll buy that. There's times when you have to do that, especially if what you're doing is you're compromising to move the ball forward in the right direction. There's very few Republicans who seem to understand what that means. Most of them view compromise as losing less and moving backwards. But when you're in a situation in which you're prevailing on some of your ideas, then sometimes you can't go quite as far as you want. So you compromise a little bit, but just knowing you're going to try to push back and achieve the better goal when you're in a better political position moving forward. Both sides, or all sides, depending on how you look at it, they do the same thing. The difference is that the conservative, liberty, freedom-oriented sort of direction is not the direction that tends to have all the big resources and the continuous buildup of a long-term ratcheting campaign in one direction. And that is something that we have to change. That's why you always have to think about maintaining governance is not this perfect utopian scheme that you've structured with a perfectly written constitution and with angels elected forever that's get in there and do the right thing. It just isn't going to be that way, which is why you have to be engaged and involved in the process. And the little things matter because they do add up over time. So being wonkish and detail-oriented on this is kind of useful, but you really need two different types of people involved in that. You need the people that are detail-oriented and wonkish and pay attention to the little things, and you need the big picture strategists and people who are charismatic enough to know how to kind of carry the field and move the ball down the direction of freedom and liberty, hopefully, that you're moving towards. There's a lot of work on this to make it work. And that's true at the national level, true at the state levels, even true in your city council. Hershey Baker, do you think Sideshow Bob will be a one-term governor and Washington will be able to flip red in the next presidential election if the taxes get worse in the state? I think it's possible. You're going to have the right type of candidate. One of the things that Republicans make this mistake in our state, but I see the same thing in California and Colorado and some of these other states as well, even in conservative states, is they presume that because the Democrat, whatever politician it is that has a D next to their name, because they're so insane and nutty, and they're so weird and they're so corrupt or they're so dishonest that everybody has to see just how bad they are the same way I do. So therefore, I'm just going to presume that they blow themselves up to the point that replacing them becomes easy. This is a theory. Political consultants will always follow this theory because it's the other side, don't get in their way when they're feeding victory to you potentially. So that's kind of the theory that people will operate under, but it's a lazy theory because it presumes that somehow the rest of the population where you live is going to be getting the information the same way that you are. If you, for example, live in the Seattle area and you're foolish enough to waste your money on a Seattle Times subscription and you're getting your news in that way, you have no idea what's actually going on in your community. Flat out, no idea. It's completely narrative controlled, tamed media. They do whatever they can to support the Democrat Party in all levels of government. All levels. And so every now and then they'll do a soft critique to pretend like they pay attention, but mostly they just regurgitate whatever the public affairs officer tells them to say. And when they accidentally commit an act of journalism and they might be going down that road where they're going to report on something truthful that's happening that doesn't make the government look great, then the government intervenes and convinces them to not do the article, or if they do accidentally publish the article and publish some truth by mistake, people get fired and lose their jobs, which further intimidates the rest of the people, whatever journalists might actually be left there, to decide to pull back and not do anything. And cowardice is kind of the default setting there. Same thing happens with King 5 News and a number of these other places. Well, the people that are relying on entities like that for their news, they have no idea what's going on. The things that you and I might know, because we talked about it, we looked at public records, or we've demonstrated some problem there. Majority of people in our community who, unless they're getting the news the same way, they have no idea about that stuff. So they're blissfully going forward without that level of awareness. Now, most traditional media in Washington state has been compromised in some way or another. And so they're unlikely, if not impossible, to ever tell the truth about what's going on. If they're forced to adjust to the fact that, yes, taxes were just raised for no reason, bloated beyond recognition, and the government's still so incompetent that they're going to lose money and fail at almost every significant job that we give them to achieve. At some point, they may have to kind of acknowledge it in some way or spin it around or blame Trump or do something. But generally, how do you convince those people to make the right decisions when they have no idea what's going on? And largely, that's been one of the challenges that we face with communicating the information out there to the public. It's not that once every 2 years or 4 years when you have an election cycle and you think that suddenly that 6 months before then you're going to influence the population, and that's just not true. You really, in order to make an impact in your community, I think you have to have widespread, consistent, effective communication for probably 2 to 4 years before you really make a tangible, notable impact that you can really measure an electoral outcome. And that isn't the plan that any political consultant that exists out there in Washington state, that isn't their plan ever, because they can't make money doing that. They only make money on campaigns that give them a bunch of money and then lose, and then they come back and get the money again the next time with somebody else. So the consultant class that exists has totally abandoned the field when it comes to communication and education in the community, because it's kind of this perpetual hamster wheel grind over the period of time. The left is pretty good at that, and they know how to fund it. But anybody that's opposed to the left generally hasn't had a consistent approach to how we communicate information to the public and educate them about what's actually going on. were you to peel back the onion and be fully aware of, the man behind the curtain, not to continually mix up ridiculous metaphors over and over again here, but if you were to see how bad governance really is, how corrupt they really are, and how self-serving and virtue signaling they really are, a lion's share of the people, the vast majority of them, will not be voting the way they do. But most people just don't know that. There's not enough money to corrupt everybody. So you can only get people to vote a certain way with the Democrats if they're ideologically aligned, which is not as big a percentage of the population as you think. And then those that are, they may not be ideological, but they're on the grift and on the take. That's just not a big enough percentage of the population. The question is, how do you reach this other apathetic group? Liberty and freedom dies because of apathy and ignorance more than anything else. Those are the two greatest threats that liberty has. And we have to address those and not just think it's all about rah-rah party stuff, but it's genuinely about that ignorance and apathy. And you wake up the apathetic and you make sure they aren't ignorant anymore, and then that's how you have different outcomes in elections than what you're going to see. Let's see. Sorry, I've skipped. There are a bunch of questions there that were going on. Ray Stewart, is anyone poking their head up to take on Patty Murray? Not that I'm aware of, but there probably are some Democrats that are planning to run against her. I keep hearing that she's going to resign, but I've heard that for a long time. Those tennis shoes that she pretends to wear, those got old a long time ago. And in addition to being voted on by staff in Washington, D.C. as the dumbest senator in America for over a decade and a half, if I remember right, she's still, just by process of elimination and old age, she's become a bit of a power player, and that's put her in a position where she can, dictate a lot of cash out to her friends, and there's a lot of benefits she gets from that position. So walking away from that power, I think, is difficult for most people. Just as an observer, my sense is that I think we don't appreciate as much, even more than the money, I think, is the power and the prestige that people have. If that becomes part of their identity, it's removing them from office is very difficult. Jason Fisher, question: have you seen Colorado Governor Capitol walking path bridge to nowhere? Plans are really sketchy. A bunch of his pals connected to other politicians petrified to speak against it. I haven't, but that's a good story. I'd like to tell it. So put me in touch with that one, because that one, it'd be fun to tell that one, even if it's in Colorado, because I think it's similar to what we see out here. Let's see. T.Z. Burton, can you comment on Bellingham wanting to raise water and sewer rates 40% to make up for deferred maintenance for decades? Yes, I saw that. So this is what happens in local government. You see this in Thurston County, King County a lot, Spokane, we've seen it, but even in little towns like Shelton and Colville, places like this. Wastewater treatment facilities, which are, again, a relatively fundamental kind of utility function in an urban environment in particular. So you don't have septic systems, which you can have in a more distributed environment. But in these concentrated sewer systems that you build, water treatment and sewer systems, and it is so typical because it's not glamorous. It's a basic thing the government needs to do. They go one of two directions. Either they decide they're going to put in the Taj Mahal of wastewater treatment facilities and bankrupt your facility in that process. That's the Belfair example down in Mason County. That's the Tenino wastewater treatment facility that was going to bankrupt the city if it wasn't for the fact that feds came in and bailed them out. That's the Hawks Prairie facility with the lot operation in Thurston County. That's King County's done this numerous times too. And they spend an inordinate amount of money on these systems that don't even necessarily work that well. Or they have experimental engineering type systems that are testing out there. The other problem that you just revealed here that Bellingham, I think, is probably guilty of here, which is just letting deferred maintenance go because it's not exciting and nobody gets elected because they did a good job managing their wastewater treatment facility, so they deferred maintenance on it. And then suddenly it hits the point where no one's going to have sewer anymore, and that's going to create a disaster. But the deferred maintenance now has exponentially increased the cost of actually fixing the system that you should have been maintaining all along. I once interviewed a former city manager who, when I was asking him, how do you identify fiscal problems in a city? What's the easiest, like, kind of first stage indicator that there's financial trouble coming to a jurisdiction? And he said when they start to defer maintenance. Usually he was referring to roads, which is a bigger part of like the city and county budget. The same thing though applies to wastewater treatment facilities and also water. If you have like a PUD or something that's managing the water facilities, usually PUDs do a little bit better job. Public utility districts do a little bit better job managing the deferred maintenance. They usually don't do that as much because it's kind of their only job. But boy, when you integrate this into a potential taxing problem for the people who live there, like Bellingham's done, that's really a history of a lot of losers and bad people in government, which Bellingham's had an egregious string of exceptional stupidity and corruption on their city council. And so there's no surprise that they would make these dumb moves there. And the Whatcom Council hasn't helped them out much over the last 2 decades either. So it's not surprising that they suddenly have this massive increase because of their historic problems. And it's a classic kick the can down the road. So you're you'd rather take your cash and kick it over to the homeless industrial complex because they're going to give you money on the back end and help you get elected next time, or maybe they'll give you special deals so you get whatever cash kickback scheme you've got organized with them. It's a little bit harder to do that on the wastewater treatment facility. So let's just take away their deferred maintenance and kick it down the road. This is so typical that you see it all the time. So anyway. We will see. Let's see. Terry Renee, unity focused. How do we break the stranglehold of the Democrat trifecta in Washington? Well, first, you get and recruit really good candidates to run in some of those edge districts. There's 7 ledge districts around the state where Republicans can win if they run people who don't need a drool cup to function in public and have a level of organization that's slightly above a 4th grader. And they don't hire one of the morons who pretend to be a consultant in our state to destroy their campaign and steal the money from them. So if you can do that, you've got a reasonable chance. You run good people that are capable of getting in there. You won't win every race, but if you challenge them and run them real people in those positions, you've got a really good shot. Now, there's also, alternatively, with fixing some of the problems with their voter rolls, that's a separate thing out there. But let's presume that we're able to make some progress on that and we're able to clean up some of the problems in the voter roll system and that the elections are a little bit more accurate than they currently are. But if you run really good people, a lot of these races right now are still very, very close. Even with crappy candidates on the Republican side, you can change that a lot with really good candidates and then really good campaigns. Don't wait late. Don't have a stealth secret ghost campaign. You don't win that way. You have to start early, plan ahead, and remember the whole marketing, putting the word out there as much as possible for as long as possible. That's the best way to get out there. You start to prevail in a couple of these districts and you change the nature of the voting patterns in those districts. And when people realize that we're electing a Republican who didn't need a drool cup to function in public, and they were not a weirdo, and they actually were solid, and they did what they said they were going to do, and they see a difference and shift in Olympia, I think you're more likely to make some pretty big changes there. So anyway, that's how I would start. Glenn, the reason the Washington State shipyards didn't get the contract is they probably failed to line the governor's pocket. Mark Knowles. Yeah, I don't think so. Listen, they're fully they're corrupt and willing to line anybody's pocket. I just don't think that they could pull it off close enough to the price range that the $1 billion kicked out to Florida was going to give Ferguson. It is amazing to see that they decided to go to Florida. But, this is what happens when you destroy your local base and then you wonder why you're not able to provide those kind of services or jobs. It is really worth digging into. Now that it's been awarded, there should be some history information that we can put together on exactly who they went to and what the quotes were. Some records requests being filed already on that. But when that information comes out, I think there's a different story that we have to say. Janice Lohman, exactly why we stopped our subscription to the Seattle Times. Yeah, and I have to tell you, I have a history of the Seattle Times because I was a paper boy. I delivered the Seattle Times back when I was 12 years old to 16, back when they had paper shacks and paper routes. And I would go out every day. I delivered the Seattle Times on my bike consistently at 110 homes, which if you know what the Sunday paper looked like back when it was a real paper, those were large papers. I had the big cart on the back and then the bag over the cart and then carrying the bag myself. It was all I could do to really waddle my way on that little Schwinn bike out of the paper shack and get those papers delivered, at dark 30 in the morning, especially on Sunday. And it was an afternoon delivery on the weekdays, but it was Sunday and Saturday were early morning deliveries. And I just remember doing that for 4 years. And so, it's funny because obviously the Seattle Times isn't a real paper anymore, but it used to be probably. And the biases that exist in print media or the video or TV media that you see, there's always going to be biases, but it's bad when you've developed a system or have a paper like the Seattle Times now that's just dysfunctional. They can't even report on the truth on anything. If it has even the slightest hint of going against the dominant narrative that the governor and the Democrats want to have, and that just turns into a situation in which you're just no longer a reporter. You're just state-run tame media, and that's all they become now, unfortunately. Let's see, JCK, I'm assuming that means Jack, regarding government continuous process. That said, folks are going to get burned out and they want to live their lives. So continuity of effort is going to have to be developed to do that. I agree. And not everybody has to continuously do it 100% of the time, all the time. What you need to do, or what we have to do, right, is we organize in a way where there's some people that do it all the time. I'm one of those weird people that's willing to do this all the time. But then you create that support system that allows people, and it has to be more than me, obviously, but a number of people like me out there doing different things, communicating, researching, exposing, confronting, campaigning, running for office, whatever it is, people that are going to spend a lot of time doing this. And they're going to dedicate their lives to fixing these problems. But you need a decent support network behind them. And when you look at anything related to how you support a campaign or how you support that continuity of effort, it requires some level of participation in the community. And right now you have maybe 1% to 2% of the population that's engaged in trying to push back for freedom and liberty on a regular and consistent basis. And that's how you have burnout, because they're trying to do more. They understand the significance of it, and they're just trying to do too much. The once every 4-year votes for Donald Trump or whatever, that isn't going to change the world, right? But people will think that's my big contribution. No, it's not. I mean, you have to do this whole long grind in all these other ways, and that's where the hard part is. Voting once every 4 years is easy. So what we have to do is build that sort of base to support it. And people will put more money in a tip jar for the Starbucks barista every week than what they'll usually give in a year to the political process. That statistics back this up. And the left is different. They're willing, probably because their politics is their religion, and so they replaced it with that. So on the right, on the people who are more conservative, liberty-oriented, they tend to donate money, but they tend to donate it more to churches or other types of causes, and they don't really think about the political side as part of that cause support structure that you need to have. Probably people watching this video, you're going to be a higher percentage of people who do, but most people don't think that way. And so there's a very, very small fraction of the population that even bothers to support any kind of a system to push forward. And that's the culture change that has to go on. I don't anticipate everybody's going to be doing the same thing I'm doing. It'd be great if you could, but I don't think it's realistic. And so some people have a proclivity and an interest and a capability, and it's interesting to them. They're going to stay on it long enough to have an impact. But there's more people that need to be supporting them behind, and that's what's very hard, I think, for people to understand. T.Z. Burton, Mike Johnson today announced that 28 Trump executive orders are now law. They were part of the BBB, including reduced personal and Doge cuts. Reducing personnel and Doge cuts. Okay, that's true. And anything that probably came through that really did cut some of the budget. There wasn't as much as I wanted to see. And the additional $9 billion Recision Package that's coming through right now, I think it's important. But I think that these are playing offense, right? Getting out there and doing those things. I do not want to see us continuing to blow our future generations' income into garbage today, I'd like to stop doing that and reduce the amount of exposure we have to a ridiculous deficit. Brian Smith, howdy. Have you heard anything about semi-bird lately? And the answer to that is no, I haven't actually. Which is not unusual. When people lose political races, they usually disappear and you rarely see them again. Let's see. Regarding getting candidates that don't need a drool cup, laugh out loud. True. Got a visual. Well, good. I'm glad that it helped visualize some of the challenges that you face when you're out there doing candidate recruitment. Unfortunately, our vetting process doesn't ID. They need one until they're in office. Yeah, usually. Anyway, thanks for pointing out and listening to me on that. I went off on kind of some tangents there. With that, guys, I'm looking at my time, and I've obviously gone a little bit past the time, but it looks like we're getting kind of our usual traffic now. I know it's in the middle of the summer. It's beautiful out there. Washington State's a great place to live, and it's hard to compare with what we have here. My son went out the other day with a camping trip with his friends up in the mountains in the snow. They couldn't get high enough to summit Goat Rocks. It was snowing too much. They went up to about 7,000 feet, camped up in the mountains, and decided that that was enough for their camping that weekend. And they came out of the mountains, and the next night they were camping out on the ocean. And it's very few places in America or anywhere else that you can actually do something like that and have those types of experiences like I did when I was younger too. I remember taking my kids out to the ocean in the morning and then driving back and taking them out Rainier the next day, and it was really a fun experience, to have with them. We live in a great state. There's a lot of advantages that we have here. A lot of historical investments been made by previous generations to make this a great state, and so why people want to pre-surrender so easily and give it away to the craziest weirdos that we can find in our society and put them in charge of government, it is mystifying to me, and I believe that it is worth the effort and time for us to show up and push back against them. And I think it just starts with you and I, and it starts with other people who are willing to be engaged in that process. So I hope you enjoy the next couple of videos I'm launching this week. Probably next week when I'm anticipating I'm doing the live stream same time next week. When I come back in here, I want to be talking probably a little bit about what I am doing out in South Dakota. And so that presentation, I hope I'll get somebody to film it, and perhaps I can present that to you as well, and it might be interesting to you. The other thing that I'd like to do is also discuss at some point in time over the next couple weeks. I am in the process of getting a studio set up later this year. It's not as simple as it sounds, and there's a little bit more work involved than you might imagine, but I'm excited to go down that road with you. You're going to be seeing it, so you'll have to tell me what you think about it. There's going to be some interim steps that I have to go through to get to that point, but I am eager to get that completed because I believe that it'll allow me to greatly increase the amount of video production that I can do and communication to whatever degree that I have the ability to communicate effectively. And on top of that, more importantly, once I feel comfortable with it, then I want to start being able to train others to do the same thing. I think that's important, and we have to work on expanding the number of people that do stuff like this if they're good and capable of doing so. Otherwise, I'll see you at the Doge training next week. If you are in Lewis County or Clown County, Monday or Thursday, look on the We the Govern website. I'm going to have to start changing some of the. I got a backlog of articles I got to start posting up there too. But so feel free to pay attention to where those are if you don't know. And if you are in one of the many other jurisdictions that you've reached out to me, I don't have confirmed dates or locations for you yet. So make a point of reaching out to me and talking to me so that we can get those on the calendar and get them set up. A lot of good stuff's coming out of Doge, Washington, and I'm eager to tell some of those stories as we move forward here. So with that, guys, let's get out there, make a difference, enjoy the weather, and enjoy the family, and hopefully you had a great 4th like I did, and I will see you next time. And remember, as I always say, the future belongs to those who show up.